Always first, Ian.
Hi, Gordon.
How you doing?
I'm on mute.
Good.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
I'll go on mute then.
I've done that.
Perfect. Thank you.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Great.
We'll just give everybody a few minutes to get on, and then I'll introduce you, and I'll just read a little bit of your Masonic CV out.
Super. Thank you.
Good evening, brethren.
Good evening, Claudio.
Zucchini's joins us for the world premiere of her new song dedicated to the everyday heroes in the front lines of this pandemic. That is Thursday night at 8 Eastern on CNN. Back to our breaking news. Lawmakers reaching a deal on hundreds of billions in new relief for struggling small businesses and hospitals. First vote in the Senate just a few hours away.
Someone's got their TV on in the background. You should all be muted, but if you've unmuted yourself, can you please remute?
I think I was guilty, Gordon.
That's all right, John. I've muted you from this end, John.
Good evening from the Netherlands.
Sorry, you're talking to me.
Good evening. Everyone's muted, so they won't hear you. Or they'll hear you, but they can't reply.
All right.
That's me on board, hopefully.
It sure is, Slider. Thank you. Sorry, Provincial Grandmaster Slider.
Just to the 10th of June, buddy.
The respect will continue past it.
That's not what the word of sons are telling me.
Well, I'll get them sorted for you.
Oh, I can sort them. Well, most of them anyway.
So just give it another couple of minutes, Brian, to get us past 7 o'clock, and that's 18:57 just now, according to my electronic device. It's called an iPhone nowadays. Brian, don't be offended if I mute you from this end and you've not done that. It just makes life easier for the presenter. There's no background noise. Yeah, please use the chat facility, Brian, to introduce yourself to everyone else.
Hello. Yes, thank you. Good evening, everyone. This is Doug Holden, Master number 11.
Well, good evening, Brian. Welcome back to what is now, I think, our 5th meeting conducted by Zoom under auspices of the Lodge Hope of Karachi, number 337. It's our small way of trying to ensure that we can get through the COVID crisis with some Masonic education. As many of you will know, the Grand Master Mason has sent out some guidance on how we should conduct these meetings. So just as a quick recap, can I ask you all to have your videos enabled so I can vouch that you're all Freemasons or as close to Freemasons as possible. I can ask you all to keep muted. If you do have any questions for our presenter this evening, if you can send me a message via the chat facility, and I will then ensure that your question is posed. We are recording this session and it will be available on the Lodge Hope of Karachi Facebook page. If you're not on that, please search, drop me a message, say that you were here this evening, and we will accept you into our Facebook pages as well. We do have, for anybody who's not already joined us before, we're meeting every Tuesday at 7 p.m. We have upgraded to the professional version of Zoom, which means we've got longer than the 40 minutes, but just to ensure a semblance of control, we're aiming for that 40-45 minute length, and if the discussion is still going, we can continue that on, but if we get closer to the hour mark, Brian, I will be quite brutal with the end meeting button, and we can carry the discussion on via Facebook. This evening, Brian, I'm very delighted to welcome Brother Geoffray, worshipful Brother Geoffray Toulmin to our midst this evening. Geoffray joined the first Skype meeting, and he then got in contact with me asking if he would if we would be interested in having a presentation from him, a presentation that he does down in his part of the world, which is North Yorkshire. A little bit about Geoffrey, and he'll add to this no doubt. He was initiated in the Alcuin Lodge 6300 in York in 2007, and last year he joined the Provincial Grand Stewards Lodge. He's an active steward, and for us in Scottish Freemasonry, some of these terms may be strange, and we may get answers of that later on this evening. He's a current member of Agricola 1911 chapter and St Saviour Gate Lodge of Installed Masters. His favourite Masonic activity is lecturing, and he's part of the Provincial Grand Lodge lecture team, and this is one of the 4 lectures he gives regularly. It's a nice, neat follow-on from what we've heard from Brother Bob Cooper, who's talked to us about early Scottish Freemasonry. And Geoffrey's going to talk to us about an initiation, not easy to say when you've been locked away for 4 weeks, Brian, and a festive board, again, terms that are the initiation's not, but festive board's not a normal term used in Scottish Freemasonry at a regular meeting. And it's going to be from around 1745. And again, that's for our province, it's quite an important date, because that was when the first Provincial Grand Master was appointed to look after the Bren and the lodges in Fife and Kinross. And we're celebrating a major anniversary this year. So it's a nice connection between what Geoffrey's about to talk to us about and the history of our province. So, Brian, I will mute myself now and I will pass over to Worshipful Brother Geoffrey Toulmin.
Good evening, brethren. It's an absolute pleasure to be with you this evening. This lecture is based on the book Solomon in All His Glory, or The Master Mason. And if you want to have a look at it, you can just Google it, and it's there in full text. I've used no other source material, but condensed the book from 68 pages into this 25-minute story of his initiation ceremony. The brethren here assembled will no doubt notice all the differences between the ceremony, which took place in around 1745, and today. I will pick up some of these at the end of the story. First, let's have a look at what was happening in the world in 1745. George II was King of England. A precursor to the American War of Independence was happening in the United States, which at that time was still a colony. This time, we were fighting the Spanish in what became known as the War of Jenkins' Ear. Nelson wouldn't be born for 12 years. Parliament was discussing immigration, so no change there. And the Parliament passed a law giving people born in the colonies British citizenship. In pop music, the song Rule Britannia was at the top of the charts. Well, it was played for the first time in any event. In Freemasonry, the Royal Order of Scotland was founded. The Prime Minister was Robert Walpole, regarded as the first Prime Minister of Great Britain, who resigned in the following year after a vote-rigging scandal at the Chippenham by-election. We're 2 years after the rules of golf were established for the first competition. Times were very different in 1768 when this book was published, as you will see. And it's to be remembered that publishing such a book as this was punishable by all the blood-curdling penalties that came into play by revealing the secrets entrusted to him. It's to be noted that this book was not published in Fleet Street, where the printers were, the street next to his lodge in London, but in Berlin, written in French. The author is publishing an expose on Freemasonry, being disillusioned by it. He seems particularly irked throughout the book by the money he pays for the various degree ceremonies, and brethren should count the number of times this is mentioned in the talk. His final words at the end of the book are that he thinks they, his Masonic brothers, should back time for must begin. And
Lost the picture.
this
Geoffrey, I think we're maybe losing you.
master
Oh.
happens lodge in the Strand.
So I'm just going up this, having this dinner. Sure, that's not supposed to happen. I've lost it.
Has anyone got video?
No. Turn. I've lost this picture.
We've lost the whole thing. There's only two people left in this. There's you and me. I've just looked at the number of participants.
I'm here, Gordon. Can you hear me?
Evening, Gordon.
Hello, Gordon.
Hi, Gordon.
Hello.
This is even quieter than the lodge room.
What you need now is somebody to eat mince.
With a guy in the side saying, huh, huh, huh.
Anybody want to give a lecture?
Anybody want a sweetie?
We can hear you, Bob. You might as well go for it.
The paper.
Did any of you go to the meeting today for the Royal Ark Mariners?
I'm a member.
No, there was a meeting for Mark Master Mason's Hall today online. Did any of you go onto that one?
No.
It should be up if you're on Master Masons of England page. They recorded it and put it all up, and there's a nice little lecture for the RAM today.
Gordon, if you're trying to talk to us, you're muted.
Oh,
Hello
that
there,
helps
I'm
us.
back.
Hey,
He's back.
right. Geoffrey,
I'm back. Sorry about that.
and I was muted as well, trying to talk to the Bern to say I was trying to talk to you. So we're all
Right.
good to restart.
We're all good. Okay, we can see you now. We can see someone else. Right. Okay. Well, we got basically this an officer in His Majesty's Army and a serving soldier. I'm off to war again soon and may not return. I'm writing this as I want to render myself more serviceable to my fellow creatures, not only in Freemasonry in general, but to the wider world in particular. I would like to ask you, what is the greater crime? Speaking your tremendous oath in the first place, or betraying the secrets surrounding it? I think better say that I've fallen out of love with Freemasonry. After all, there are plenty of better things you could be doing with your time. If you're an artist, why are you not painting? I'm writing this book so that people are not conned into coming into Freemasonry and know what they're getting into first. It's expensive to join. And I've always pitied those who join out of curiosity. Others are looking for the secrets to eternal youth. The very philosopher's stone, no less, but they will be disappointed. Before a man is made a Mason, he flatters himself with great honour to be had from this, but really there isn't. I think it's high time that Masonry is driven off the stage. Wouldn't you be shocked to find out once I've written this book, the mask will drop and all that will be left will be the traces of and charcoal we use to illustrate the symbols on the floor. Now, usually at this point, I give some historical context about Bonnie Prince Charlie, but I won't do that today because being Scots, you all know all about history. But basically, basically, Bonnie is written as the events. Bonnie was charged to put the dates of these events into context, as the Pretender, as he was known at the time, was beaten 40. This to the writer's initiation must have been prior to this time. My best guess from looking back at historical documents is 1745, but that is only a guess. Back to the author. My friend, let's call him Mr. Cowan. Meet Bonnie, Prince Charlie's forces. He couldn't believe that I was prepared first being made a Mason. My first thought was, how much is this going to cost me? But he scoffed at my asking, and then on closer questioning told me it would be £12 sterling, but said that it was a mere trifle for a man of my means. Under pressure, I agreed, and was brought in front of a Mr. Fielding. He approved me, and the date was set for my initiation. When I got to the Swan Tavern in the Strand in the centre of London, I met a few of the brethren and chatted for a while, whilst the others were in a back room preparing it. This room was secured from observers. Everyone welcomed me with great joy in the fact that I was to be admitted as a member amongst them. They all told me I was going to see the most astonishing wonders in the universe. I believed what they told me, as I had no reason not to. The treasurer approached me and took my money, and I signed the register. I was quite nervous by now, but my friend approached me and said that it was time to go into the next room. I was surprised to see that it was very dark, with the windows and the curtains drawn. He told me they called it the Black Room, and if I was still going to go ahead with my initiation, I should reflect. He then sat there and said nothing. I asked, reflect on what? But he refused to answer. Well, as you can imagine, 1,000 things were going through my mind, and not any of them good. They didn't tell me anything beforehand, and they had my money now, so I endured the silence. After a long period of silence, he told me to divest myself of metal. He made me take off my left shoe and put on a slipper, exposed my left breast and right knee, and then blindfolded me. I couldn't see a thing. He was very attentive to the metal thing. He noticed that my frock coat had metal buttons on it and made me remove it. Then he knocked twice at the door. He knocked twice quietly so that I shouldn't hear the correct knocks prior to seeing the light. The second warden said to the first, "Brother, they knock at the door." This news was conveyed to the Grand Master. The best guess is it was John, 1st Viscount Dudley. They opened the door and then shut it again, loudly in disgust at seeing a profane, meaning uninitiated in this context. The door was knocked upon again, and they were told that I was there and desirous of being made a Mason. There were various reports. Everything is done in threes. I was then asked several questions and told them my name was Thomas Wilson and that I'm 24 years old. This, I was informed, was wrong. I should have said that my name is Wilson and that I'm 5.5 years old, a mysterious age which perfectly expresses the innocence and candour of a Freemason. I replied as instructed. He then checked that I was properly prepared, and being satisfied I was then admitted to the temple, which, remember, I hadn't seen yet, and then I was conducted by means of 3 people to the altar of the Grand Master. As I approached the west, they shouted at me from the east, "Rash profane, dare you tread this ground? What is your motive for appearing in this august temple? Do you come here to be instructed in our mysteries, or to insult them and then tell others? You are silent, profane. Answer." Well, I was rather taken aback by this. I couldn't see who was shouting at me, and I didn't know what to answer. I plucked up courage and said that I was here to ask him to grant me a place with the brethren. There was then a brief further exchange, after which the Grand Master said, "Well then, let this profane travel under the iron vault from east to west in search of the light." The brother who held me by the hand then made me take 3 turns round the lodge, and at every step they cried, "Raise your foot, lower your head, salute." I constantly heard over my head the clashing of swords. Now and again I ran into cold steel, which was held by a brother, and was instructed to lower my head. I was terrified. At every step there was something to trip over or run into, and the noise and my blindness was disorientating. After a while, I ended up with my face against the wall, awaiting my fate. "I take pity on this profane," the master said. "Brethren, let him see the light." My blindfold was then removed, and I was instructed to take a turn to the right. I was confronted by brothers with swords pointed at me with menacing looks on their faces. The master had his hammer raised. On the table in front of him was a book, 3 candles and 2 sheathed swords. They all had white gloves on, and their other hands were at their throats in the form of an angle. I looked down, and what I saw made me smile. I assumed the children had drawn on the floor with chalk to amuse themselves. "Brother Warden, make him go up the temple steps," said the master. "Present him to me 3 steps at a time." I lifted my legs 7 times, as if ascending imaginary steps. I took the step with my right foot first and brought the others into an angle. As soon as I reached the altar, the master approached me and took my right hand and placed it on the swords, and my left was employed with the compasses, one point presented to my naked left breast. The book was open at the Gospel of St. John. He then made me recite the shocking oath, which I called to mind with horror. Basically, were I to divulge any of the secrets, I would be brutally murdered. And let's face it, they had already put me in a position when they could have done it, and I would have been powerless to prevent it. The master then placed me on the other side of the altar and took the apron that was intended for me. He said, "I now alter the name of this gentleman from profane to brother. Receive this apron, which entitles you to a seat amongst us." I then had to kiss the strings of the apron and tie it with the flap on the inside, as an apprentice is not entitled to wear it any other way. I was presented then with 2 pairs of white gloves, one for me to wear, the whiteness is a symbol of purity, and the second to present to her who holds the first place in my heart. This is to show them that we don't lose sight of them, even in the midst of our mysteries. The master then informed me that I was now dressed as a mason, but remained ignorant of masonry. There were signs, words, and tokens to be learned. He taught me the sign and word of an apprentice and said that the column was where the apprentices went to receive their wages. I was told how to letter or halve the word and the caution with which it should be communicated. I don't have time here to provide you with the exact details of the full ceremony, but I'm sure you are all aware what it contains. I then went round and kissed the brethren 3 times. I felt sure I was going to be instructed in something much less trifling, and the master called me back to the altar. He then told me of a second word, which the Freemasons have adopted, on account of the intimate connection between them and the first Vulcan, or artificer, of the universe. I was then directed to the childlike drawings on the floor, and he told me that I should content myself with what I'd learnt today, but that these drawings would be explained when I became a fellowcraft. He then closed the lodge with 3 knocks, and we all shouted, "Huzzah! Huzzah! Huzzah!" Everyone came over and congratulated me, or repeated the signs. "You haven't seen anything yet," one said. Another, "Were you frightened?" And, "Your eyes begin to open, but we'll show you a lot more." I thought to myself, what will you show me? I do not feel the value of my knowledge will be equal to those shining guineas that I paid for it. The brothers were now very keen for their suppers, having spent so much time in labour. The 2 brother waiters took a wet cloth and took great care to remove the chalk marks on the floor. It was with regret that I watched so ingenious a piece of drawing erased. But the table that was elegantly served at my expense now took my attention. A brother took up a bottle, asked me what I called it. I thought this was odd and replied, "It's a bottle." "You are wrong," he said. "It's a barrel." He picked up a glass next to it and said, "What's this?" A glass or tumbler?" I replied. "No," he said, "it's a cannon. You probably don't know that we call red wine powder and white wine and water white powder. Every brother has a barrel in front of him and charges his own cannon." We then ate supper, and I noticed that the same layout as in the lodge was observed in terms of seating positions, the master in the east and 2 wardens in the west. There was nothing missing from the meal apart from sobriety. By this time, we had drunk our bottle each, and the conversation was predictably very happy when there was a loud, startling knock, and we were called to order. The master then reopened the lodge and interrogated the brethren through a list of many questions and answers, that I might start to learn them. I was very surprised to hear reasonable people giving such serious answers to childish questions. To start with, I thought everyone could give whatever answer they wanted, but I soon found out that there was a form to it, passed down by verbal tradition. Once this was done, the brethren were told to form a line and charge their cannons. Everyone laid hold of a barrel of red powder and charged accordingly. The master checked that the cannons were charged, and then we rose up with a napkin on our arm and our aprons on our fronts. We then drank the health of the Grand Master with all the honours of Freemasonry, 3 times, on the instruction, present, fire, well fired, brethren. The glass was still to our lips. Keep your eyes on him who commands the exercise, said he, and drew attention to the lines that the angles of our arms made. Then on a count of 3, we all brought our glasses smartly down onto the table at the same time. We then clapped our hands 9 times, 3 by 3, and then huzzaed 3 times, very loudly, I can tell you. It didn't stop there. We fired for each member of the royal family, for the master of the lodge, for visitors, for the master of other lodges, for myself as a newly made brother, and concluded with the masons' wives. The number of firings in no way decreased the enjoyment, as the more one drinks, the more one drinks. This is the greatest vice of masons. The sumptuousness of the table brings on intemperance, and the variety of wines often brings on a confusion of language. The master's gavel often can't be heard because of the noise, and reason is obscured in the very centre of light itself. This blemish, which seems to tarnish masonry, is really only a foil to its brilliance. Non-masons would give in to the most unpardonable excesses, but a mason always preserves a certain reserve, which springs from the fountain of virtue which masonry inspires him. I've visited most lodges in France and England, and I've never heard any swearing or indecent expression. If a brother does err in this way, he's fined a shilling or a crown, and this money is faithfully distributed to the poor. If a brother finds what another has said unacceptable, he tells the master. The master then pronounces sentence, and the culprit must start doing penance. If the fine is monetary, the brother must say, I forfeit this sum for a fault committed. Alternatively, he may be condemned to swallow a certain number of glasses of water. He acknowledges this by saying, I charge my canon with white powder for a fault committed. Sometimes he will address the whole lodge via the junior warden and apologise, but in doing so he must not make excuses relating to another brother. Faults committed outside the lodge are also dealt with in the same way. Misunderstandings are rectified and disputes amicably settled. After many discharging of artillery, we began to get very tired and thought of closing the lodge, but not before one final toast to the prosperity of all brothers. The lodge was then closed with the wardens repeated the signs, and we replied with 3 loud huzzas. This is the wondering what I thought about it all. Well, I most regretted the loss of my time and money. Nevertheless, the excellent morals with which I've been acquainted had made an impression on me, and I was anxious to start putting them into practice. Masonry owes the progress it has been made by the practice of conditions by which it restores in lodge. I was later to be admitted as a fellow of the craft, and then persuaded to part with a further 4 guineas, £2,380 in today's money, to be made a master mason. But that my brothers is a story for another day. Masonry used to consist of a society of select men who were united by the ties of friendship and virtue to give each other mutual assistance in their wants. At present, it consists of a confused jumble of obscure and undistinguished people, indiscriminately drawn from almost every situation, uniting in one opinion, the love of gormandizing. It's easier to lift the veil of Freemasonry than to say where it came from. History keeps a profound silence with respect to the origin, and we have no documents or memorable events to throw any light on this. We can make some well-founded guesses, though. England claims the honour of the invention of masonry. As we know, brethren, he was wrong about that one. It's hard to trace to the times of Solomon and Adoniram. The supposition is only symbolic and has no relation to its real history. Solomon is the symbolic name for wisdom. His temple represents the union and fellowship of the brethren. A society of friends was intended to be established, which must certainly have been the design of masonry and the characters, of Solomon and Adoniram chosen to distinguish and separate them. Some people have imagined that masonry was instituted to accomplish the replacing of the House of Stuart upon the throne of England, but these are groundless suspicions. Masons trouble themselves with neither religion nor politics. Their sole objective at their meetings is pleasure. Other speculative Masons would have us recur to the Knights Hospitallers of Jerusalem, in order to find the first fathers and original founders of Masonry. This is another mistake and has no probability for its foundation. What gives rise to this notion is that these knights chose St. John as their patron, and all lodges are dedicated to St. John. From that, they would infer that the English and French lords who took part in the Crusades were Masons. But these people, who either forget or are ignorant of the motives of our order, do not consider that St. John always preached to his disciples union and brotherly love. My dear children, love one another. The Freemasons, who have founded the basis of their society on charity and equality, wanted to make known what spirit moved them, and so aligned themselves with St. John. I wish that history had passed down the name of the person who had started Freemasonry. The man has a claim to immortality, was possessed by good sense and generous sentiments. He perceived that all men were equal by nature, and that nothing but accident makes distinction. All Masons want is to enforce this equality in a loving manner. That person conceived a system that, in my opinion, he borrowed from Plato's Republic. Once more I say it, and it's with truth I repeat it, everything in Masonry is allegorical. The Temple of Solomon represents the majesty of the lodge where the brothers were. The two brazen columns express the support of the building. The blazing star is the torch which enlightens them. The canopy is interspaced with stars, showing the free communications Masons have with the heavens, in separating themselves with the uninitiated and also from vice. The level represents equality. The rule and compass prudence and circumspection of conduct. The white gloves, purity of their manners. The eyes of a new member is veiled on his being admitted, to point out to him the blindness of men who have their own happiness within their reach and have the power of constantly keeping it, but yet who do not see it. He's disposed of all metals, so he's not interested in wealth. His right knee is held out naked in commemoration of the cirrus which St. John had at his knees. He's made to travel to make him advance towards the light and actively see it. The other ceremonies use a sort of cement to the rest to give the whole kind of thing a form and meaning, just as we see the soldier in performing drill exercises. These are no way necessary on the day of battle. The signs, token and words are for brethren to know each other by and to stop anyone from attending. As previously stated, this book was published in 1768. These are just some quick conclusions. The events took place in time before that, obviously estimating around 1745. Even the title has some meaning, and in the 1760s, when the book was published, everyone who was educated would have recognised the significance, as it's a Bible verse from Matthew. Even Solomon in all his glory would not have been arrayed like one of these. There are a number of interesting differences to be noted from what we do today, but a lot of what has been recounted is very similar and familiar to us. The author seems to have enjoyed Freemasonry, but seems disappointed in the secrets and mysteries. He's clearly missed the point and not discovered anything more than the superficial part of Masonry that's face value. He finds the ritual tedious and is most concerned with the cost. Having said all that, he admits to having been in most of the lodges in England and France, so it can't have been all that bad. On the subject of the cost, it's clear that becoming a Mason was a serious financial consideration in those days. It was not something to be taken lightly, as it is possible to be today. However, the fact that he's invested this money means that he's committed to Masonry for a considerable length of time. He's paid the equivalent of £15,578 to join, and then pays for the festive board in its entirety, then a further £2,300 to be raised. I would expect from the way he talks about the festive board that the cost of those would be relatively expensive as well, considering the number of bottles of Chateau European Wine Lake, or should I say red powder, that they consumed. I think the first thing that surprises me in the account is that his friend, Mr. Cowan, is shocked that he's preparing to go to war without being made a Mason. Clearly, this is something that a gentleman would do. They meet in the Swan pub on the Strand in London. At the end of the book, there's a published list of all the lodges, 416 in total. Number 403 is the White Hart at Halifax, North Carolina, and most seem to meet in pubs. They appear to be listed in the same way as we do today by the date of consecration. Number 1, Queen's Arms, St Paul's Churchyard, and number 2, the Golden Fleece, Westminster, a time immemorial. But from then on, number 3 says 17th of January, 1721 next to it. Lodges are listed in Gibraltar, Madrid, France, Germany, America, Antigua, India, China, and Ireland, but interestingly, none in Scotland, presumably due to the conflict between the countries. There's a couple here for our province, but I'll leave those out. Date of the meeting is also included, so second Tuesday. So this book looks extremely useful, both as a ritual book and as a directory of lodges. They use chalk and charcoal to put the symbols on the floor. We all know why, as they're meeting in a back room in a pub and it's a public place. But we're told that 2 brother waiters cleaned the floor, possibly the equivalents of stewards today. Although they're not allowed to become master masons, fellowcraft is the highest degree to which they can attain. I think this is preserving subordination. The servants who are necessary to the conviviality of the meeting are allowed in to a point, but the gentlemen masons, who do admittedly meet as equals, lords and commoners alike, remain above the brother waiters. The waiters are not allowed to be seated in lodge until dessert, presumably so that they can clear the table, and the treasurer pays them every lodge night, which brings us nicely on to another subject, that of the officers in the lodge. You have the master and 2 wardens as of today, but their position in the lodge is the master in the east and the 2 wardens in the west. We're also told of the lodge speaker. He is the person who delivers large portions of ritual. He's described in the following way. The speaker rose up with much gravity, coughed, spat, then pronounced his harangue with great emphasis. At the end, the modest orator, covered in glory, returned to his place. The brethren all clapped 3 times. No difference there. There is no better feeling in masonry than to have nailed a long piece of ritual. There is also a brother demonstrator. He explains the tracing board. This is done for the 1st degree at the end of the 2nd. The master is such for 1 year and appoints a secretary and treasurer and a brother to distribute the fine money to the poor. There was not time in this lecture to discuss the 2nd and 3rd degree ceremonies, but it is noticeable that the initiation ceremony is quite different to ours today, with a number of things to be noted. Firstly, he's put in a black room, a reflection chamber, and something not unknown to Freemasonry today, but he doesn't appear to have been told to reflect on anything specific. So this might just have been used to keep him out of the way, to avoid any chance of him seeing something prior to his initiation. One thing is certain, our army officer admits to being absolutely terrified by the initiation, something he's clearly unhappy about. I think we were all nervous at our own, I know I certainly was, but what he describes is way beyond nerves. The intention seems to be to scare him to such an extent that he would never reveal the secrets, but this clearly didn't happen. I love the Masonic firing. I've wanted to know why it's called firing for a while now, and now I know. The indignity of having to drink water for committing a fault is very amusing. What great evenings they appear to have had. There is a section on singing in the book, but the author is not too keen. I will leave you with some useful advice for letting another know that you are a Mason. When a pinch of snuff is offered to you, give 3 knocks on the snuff box. In putting your hand forward, keep your fingers extended and let your thumb form an angle with your forefinger. In putting the snuff to your nose, smell at it 3 times. And that's it.
Geoffrey, thank you very much for that. Brian, just a couple of things before I open it out to for any questions. Geoffrey, I'm just glad that you did listen carefully to Brother Bob Cooper when he instructed you, and that Freemasonry actually did start well before that infamous date of 17 something or another.
17,
and we were before that. And with us being a lodge in the province of Fife and Kinross, and us Fifers being only second in frugalness to those from Aberdeen and the Shires, and it's good to see one of the provincial Grand Masters from Aberdeenshire up there, Brother Douglas Nichol. Good to see you, sir. And they take the credit of being the tightest region of the country after Fife, and I don't think anyone would even think about spending 15.5 grand to join the lodge. They're up in arms at trying to pay £40 a year. So
40, that's brilliant. 205 minus. Goodness me.
So, Brian, is there any questions for Geoffray? If you can drop me a quick message, or if you're technically savvy, use the little button that waves a hand.
I would like to ask the brethren a question.
Yep, please
there is something
do so.
in that I don't know the answer to. And I ask this every time I do it, and so far I haven't got an answer. So he talks about the Cirrus, C-E-R-U-S, that is at St. John's knee. And he says that's why the knee is bared in the ceremony. That his right hand held out naked, right knee is held out naked in commemoration of the Cirrus, which St. John had in it at his knees. Now, I don't know what that is, and I've been unable to find out. So if anybody knows, please tell me.
Well, we certainly have a lot of well-respected and knowledgeable Freemasons online. I'm looking straight at Charles Winston actually on this screen. He's right there, but Douglas Nicholls there, Kevin Thompson's there, to name a few. John Kirkcaldy. There's lots out there that may be able to answer that one. Charles, you're moving your computer? No.
I guess that it's some sort of band around your knee, and whether it's a penance band or I don't know. But, that's my guess. I'll answer that if I've got that.
I do have one question that's come in. Are there other references to the two wardens sitting together anywhere else in the history? And if so, when did they separate? Paul, is that a generic question, or is it in terms of this presentation in particular? And if I can find you, I will unmute you.
Hiya. Can you hear me?
You've managed. Right, Paul, thank you.
Yeah, I've never heard of the two wardens sitting together before, so I'm just curious as to if that was the case back then, when did it change and why did it change?
That's a very good question. It definitely was the case that's how the seating positions were in the lodge in the early days. And why they suddenly moved, well, they had two deacons as well, and the two deacons were placed in the south, and because the two deacons were placed in the south, I think when they moved them to be, you know, I've got something strange on the screen here, so it's finding it quite difficult to concentrate. Charles's iPhone. I'm not sure how I get rid of this.
I think Charles is sending a message there. So.
Oh, cool. Yes, that certainly was was the case in the early days, and there are a number of other accounts that back that up. As to the exact date that it moved, I don't know, and why, I don't know the answer to that either. So we've got loads more meetings on Zoom. So you know, go for it and see if you can find out and. Come back and tell us next time.
Geoffrey, there's a couple of points and have just come up on the chat. One from Dougie Fergie down in East Lothian, who's visited in France quite a lot, and he's saying that a lot of the wardens' chairs are still in the west in France, and we do know of other lodges within Scotland that the wardens' chairs still do. So they do tend to be the older lodges. That do date back to pre-UGLA being founded, potentially. So I think, again, Bob Cooper referred that to some of that in his two presentations about the structure. But I will pose your question to Bob as well when we're offline as well. So,
thank you.
St. David 36 for one, Derek Elder, thank you. And there was one other.
Somebody asked what the book was that missed the start. So the book's called Solomon in All His Glory, or The Master Mason, and you can read it all you just type it into Google and it comes up and you can read it all on there. I'm particularly interested about the numbering. I've been having a look at the numbering of the lodges, and what we know from Grand Lodge in London is that from time to time they just reorder numbers. They just renumber. So if 15 lodges had dropped off in the old days, they would just sort of reorder them, and lodges numbers would change. So various numbers have changed. I know there's some examples in Scotland where they've changed their number 3-4 times in their history.
Yeah.
Yes,
I was just going to say, Geoffrey, we've got another comment come in. The wardens in the west was so with the master of the former triangle, which
yes.
you know is an important symbol as well.
Yes. Yes, that makes sense, doesn't it?
Let's see. Okay. Bern, once again, can I take the opportunity on behalf of all our guests this evening and the members of Lodge Hope of Karachi to thank Worshipful Brother Geoffray Toulmin from the province of Yorkshire North and East Ridings for joining us this evening and taking us through that initiation ceremony and festive board from 1745. I'm sure we will see a lot of differences from our Scottish tradition, and Geoffrey, I do hope that the daily advancement that you've had joining us over the last few weeks will allow you to further educate your brethren down south on the truths that we know up here. So thank you once again for doing that. Bern, next week I'm delighted to announce that we have got Worshipful Brother Bob Bashford, past master of the Irish Lodge of Research number 200, coming to join us. Many of you will be aware of Bob. He's spoken across the world on Freemasonry. He's spoken at Lodge Hopes of Karachi's symposiums in the past, and to keep it into the sort of the 18th century type, he's going to talk to us about Irish travelling warrants. So this evening we heard from Geoffrey a little bit about the initiation of a soldier, and I'm sure that he did come across the Irish Freemasonry and the travelling warrants. The following week, I'm delighted to announce that we have got the Reverend Padre Rab Craig, Provincial Grand Chaplain of the Provincial Grand Lodge of Glasgow. And those of you who know Rab, he's a character, to say the least. And he's going to talk to us about Freemasonry under the jackboot and the experiences of Freemasonry in the Channel Islands during World War II. If memory serves me correct, Brother Robert Craig's mother lodge is in the Channel Islands, and he moved and he joined Scottish Freemasonry. The following week, which will be the 12th of May, since we're still in this lockdown, we've had confirmation just yesterday that Brother Moses Gomez from the Grand Lodge of New Jersey, who was recently over in Scotland, and he did his speaking tour on behalf of Prostate Scotland, is going to join us to talk about the Underground Railroad. And again, those who have heard Moses speak, he's quite an entertainer and quite a character as well. The recording of this will be put up onto the Lodge Hope of Karachi Facebook page at some point this evening. And Brian, once again, can I thank you all for your attendance? Can I ask you to sign the virtual tile that I'll get up on the Facebook page in about 2 minutes after we leave this meeting, and look forward to welcoming you all back next week. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
And as normal, I will unmute you all so you can say your goodbyes.
Once again, Gordon, thanks very much for organising this tonight. Been very enjoyable. Cheers.
Pleasure, thank you.
Gordon,
Thanks, Geoffrey, for your hard work and your input tonight. Very interesting. Look forward to hearing you again.
Well done, Geoffrey. Well done, Gordon, again.
Thank you. There's the boss coming in.
Yeah, thanks, Gordon.
Thank you very much, Gordon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Geoffray and Gordon.
Well done from Ayrshire.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to Geoffrey and Gordon. It was super.
I'm just jealous of David Park. He's still outside in the sun.
Lucky man.
Thank you, Gordon and Brother Geoffrey.
Having a beer.
Nice. The one entertaining feature being the moderator, Bram, I can swap through all the thumbnails, and the barbers are certainly going to make a lot of money from all these beard trims and haircuts in the next few weeks or so, or months.
Yeah, yours is looking bad as well.
Aye. There's a few provincial grandmasters looking very distinguished.
That's what we call it nowadays.
Yeah.
Take care. Bye.
Right, gents, I'll give you the countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye now.